You know, there was a time when I used to believe that turning 50 meant the beginning of the end. I don't mean that in a dramatic way, but something about the number, the half-century mark, felt so final, like crossing a line from still got time to running out of time. The world doesn't say it out loud, but you can feel it in the way people look at you, in the way opportunities get offered just a little less, in the quiet assumptions people make when you walk into a room and you're not the youngest voice anymore. My 50th birthday was quiet. There was cake, there were a few close friends, and my daughter lit a candle that said, 50 and fabulous. It was sweet, and I smiled, and I meant it. But there was something hollow sitting quietly behind my ribs, a kind of ache I didn't yet understand. Back then, I still had my job, still had a title, still got up every morning and buttoned the same dress shirt I'd worn for years, still commuted in the same traffic, listened to the same news radio, drank the same bitter coffee at my desk by 8 a.m. sharp. Routine, familiar, safe. And then came the day it all stopped. I remember it so clearly, not because it was loud or messy, but because it wasn't. It was ordinary, too ordinary. I was called into a meeting room, one of those corporate spaces with frosted glass and bland paintings of trees that looked like they'd been downloaded from some stock image site. My manager sat across from me, young, sharp, kind in the way someone is when they're about to give you bad news but want to soften the blow. You know the look. They were restructuring, budgets, efficiency. Not personal. Of course not. It never is. 25 years of my life folded into a polite envelope with a small severance and a thank you for your service. I didn't cry. Not there, at least. I think I even smiled and said something like, I understand. Because that's what you do when you're 50 and trying to keep your dignity. But the truth is, when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed for what must have been hours. No sound. Just me, and the ceiling, and a question I had no answer to. Who am I now? It's strange how much of your identity gets wrapped up in your work, in your usefulness, in the way others rely on you. For years, I'd been the one people called for answers, for decisions, for leadership. And now, nothing. The phone stopped ringing. The emails stopped coming. The days stretched long, too quiet, too still. My calendar, once packed with meetings and deadlines, was suddenly blank. That silence was deafening. I tried to act like it was fine, told myself I could use the rest, spent a few mornings walking around the neighborhood, watching the world go on without me. Young parents rushing to school drop-offs, joggers in sleek, colorful gear, teenagers with music blasting through their earbuds, not even noticing me as they passed. I felt invisible, like a ghost in my own life. And you know the oddest part? No one tells you what to do next. When you're young, there's always a next step. Go to school, get a job, get promoted, raise a family, climb, building, achieve. But what happens when you've done all that, and the ladder you've climbed suddenly disappears beneath your feet? What do you reach for then? I didn't have an answer. I still don't have all the answers. But I remember this feeling, this slow, creeping realization that something inside me was unraveling. Not breaking, just loosening, letting go. I stopped waking up with a purpose. I started questioning things I used to be so sure of. Things like success, value, even happiness. One afternoon, I sat alone in a coffee shop I used to visit during lunch breaks. It looked the same. Same smell of roasted beans. Same music playing low in the background. But I wasn't the same. I watched a young couple nearby laughing over a laptop full of energy and plans and promise. And I felt old. Not in a bitter way, just left behind. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting it burn just a little on my tongue, letting myself feel it. That was the moment I realized I had spent so many years building a life that I'd forgotten how to simply live. And that realization, it hurt. But it also stirred something. Not hope, not yet, but a kind of awareness. A whisper from somewhere deep inside, like an old friend tapping gently on the door of my soul, saying, maybe this isn't the end. Maybe this is just the space between chapters. I didn't know it then, but that quiet coffee shop afternoon marked the beginning of something new. Not a grand rebirth, not a sudden transformation, just the first crack in the shell I'd built around myself. And sometimes, that's where it starts. Not with fireworks, but with a silence so complete you finally hear yourself. The days after losing the job stretched on like fog, not a storm, nothing that violent. It was quieter than that, a kind of emotional overcast that just sat there, heavy, still, unmoving. You wake up and the sun is out, but inside, everything's gray. At first, I tried to stay busy, organize drawers, fix a leaky faucet, rearrange the garage, then the bookshelves, then the kitchen. It's strange, the little things we do to convince ourselves we're still needed, still useful, still something. But eventually, there was nothing left to organize. And then came the silence, the kind that isn't just around you, but inside you. A silence that doesn't scream, but whispers things you don't want to hear. You've peaked. You're too old to start over. No one's waiting for you anymore. Those thoughts don't come all at once. They creep in, little by little, until they become the air you breathe. I stopped looking at job boards after a while. Every listing asked for dynamic, fast-paced, high-energy candidates with skills I hadn't updated in years. I used to read through those ads and think, I could do this, if they just gave me a chance. But they didn't. And the silence grew louder. At home, it wasn't much better. My wife tried to be supportive, but she didn't know what to say anymore. I could see it in her eyes. Worry, fatigue, the kind that doesn't come from words but from watching someone you love drift further away each day. And I was drifting, not on purpose, but I couldn't seem to stop it. There were mornings I didn't get out of bed until noon. Afternoons I spent staring out the window, watching the wind nudge the leaves like time nudging me gently forward. Without my permission, I stopped answering calls. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to say, I'm not okay, without breaking apart. And pride is a tricky thing at this age. It tells you should have it together by now. It whispers, don't show weakness, don't burden anyone. So I smiled when I had to, laughed at the right times, said, I'm figuring things out. But inside, I wasn't figuring anything out. I was unraveling, slowly, quietly. One night I sat alone in the living room. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching. Just sound and flicker to fill the space. Everyone else had gone to bed. And that's when it hit me, the wave, that feeling that you are no longer seen, no longer wanted, no longer necessary. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat there, letting the feeling press against my chest like a weight I'd been carrying for months. And then, all at once, it broke. The tears came, slow and silent. Not from sadness alone, but from something deeper. Grief. Not for a person, but for a version of me that was slipping away. The man who once felt certain, the man who once mattered, the man who had answers. I missed him. I mourned him. And I wasn't sure if he was ever coming back. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was floating through life. Like a guest in my own house. Like a background character in other people's stories. My daughter asked me once, Dad, are you okay? I wanted to say, no. I feel lost. I wanted to say, everything I thought I was is gone. But instead I smiled and said, just a little tired. Tired. That word became my shield. But it wasn't just tiredness of the body. It was the kind that settled in the soul. Tired of pretending. Tired of feeling behind. tired of trying to keep up in a world that seems to run faster and faster, with less and less space for people who slow down to think, to feel, to remember. I found myself thinking a lot about the past, not out of nostalgia, but out of confusion, trying to find the thread that connected me to me. Who was I before the titles? Before the meetings, the responsibilities, the paycheck? Who was I really? I looked through old photo albums. I saw a younger version of myself with eyes full of fire. He had dreams. He had opinions. He had this sense that life was a wide-open road. And I envied him. But I also felt something else. Shame. Shame for feeling like I'd let him down. I started journaling. At first, just a few lines, then whole pages. I didn't know what I was writing toward, just that I had to get the ache out. Each page felt like I was peeling something back, layer after layer of armor I didn't know I was wearing. Beneath all of it, a question. Software scared. Honest. What if there's nothing left for me? And that, I think, is the real pain of this age. Not the wrinkles, not the slowing metabolism, not even the gray hair. It's the fear that we are done, that our best has passed, that no one's looking at us anymore, not because they don't care, but because they assume there's nothing left to see. 50 wasn't the end. It wasn't the edge of the map. It was a door I never knew was waiting for me, because I'd been too busy running to see it. And when life knocked me down, when the noise stopped, when the ground beneath me gave way, that's when I found it. Not success, not reinvention, but something better, a return to self, to breath, to this quiet, sacred moment we call now. And maybe that's the greatest gift of growing older. We stop chasing the world and start returning home, to ourselves, to what really matters, to the simple truth that we are still becoming. Even now, especially now, because 50 is not a finish line. It's not the end of the road. It's a beginning. And friend, if you're standing at that threshold, if you're holding the questions, the fear, the silence, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me. You're not too late. You're right on time. And there is so much life ahead of you yet. But somewhere in that darkness, something stirred. Not a light, not yet. Just a breath, a flicker, a pause, a moment where I realized if the world had stopped expecting something from me, maybe that meant I could finally ask, what do I want from me? It wasn't clarity, not yet, but it was the beginning of a shift, a slow, almost imperceptible turning of the soul, a whisper. This pain is not your prison. It might be your passage. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden clarity, no bolt of lightning. Just one morning, I woke up a little earlier than usual. The house was still dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that used to make me feel lost. But that day, it felt calm. I sat up in bed and listened, to nothing in particular. Just the hum of the heater, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the soft breath of my wife beside me. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anxious about the day ahead. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I just knew it felt different, lighter. So I got up, made a cup of coffee, sat by the window and watched the sky turn from deep gray to soft gold. And I thought, maybe this is enough. Just this. Just now. That was the beginning. You see, after the pain, something shifts. Not loudly, not in fireworks, but slowly, gently, like winter surrendering to spring. I began to notice things again. Little things. The way my daughter laughed when she forgot I was listening. The smell of rain hitting warm pavement. The ache in my knees after a long walk. Not as a complaint, but as a reminder. You're still here. Still moving. Still living. I started writing again. Not for anyone else. Just for me. Not trying to be profound. Just trying to be honest. I'd sit for an hour some mornings, just letting the pen move. And in those pages, I met a part of myself I hadn't spoken to in years. A part that didn't care about titles or resumes or LinkedIn connections. A part that didn't ask, "What have you achieved?" but rather, "What do you feel? What do you long for?" One afternoon, I found an old box in the garage. Inside were sketches, drawings I had made in my 20s. Nothing special, nothing anyone would hang in a gallery. But they were full of something I hadn't seen in a long time. Curiosity. It made me laugh. I used to love drawing. I used to love creating anything, really. Music, doodles, short stories, even silly poems. And somewhere along the road, I'd put all of it away, traded wonder for utility, passion for practicality. I sat there on the garage floor, holding those old pages like they were relics of a forgotten self. And something inside whispered, "He's still here. You didn't lose him. You just stopped visiting." I started painting again, badly at first, clumsy strokes, wrong colors. But it didn't matter. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was just letting my hands remember what it felt like to move from joy instead of obligation. And the more I painted, the more I remembered. Life isn't always about doing. Sometimes it's about being, sitting in the sun, reading a book, cooking something slow and tender just because it feels good to do something with love. One evening, I had a conversation with an old friend. We hadn't spoken in years. Life got busy as it tends to, but we talked for hours that night about nothing and everything. And somewhere in that call, I realized something. I was no longer ashamed of being 50. I didn't feel like I was fading anymore. I felt grounded, solid, whole. I wasn't chasing youth. I wasn't trying to catch up with the world. I was arriving. You see, no one tells you this when you're younger, but there is a freedom that comes with age. When you stop needing to prove yourself to everyone else, when you stop measuring your worth by your productivity, when you finally understand that your value doesn't live in what you do, but in who you are. That's when life begins again. Not the loud life, not the one full of hustle and endless ambition, but the quiet, deep, spacious kind of life. The kind where you get to choose what matters, who you keep close, where you spend your precious time and energy. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I still feel the ache in my bones. But I also feel something else. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. Not the old kind of purpose that needed applause or validation, but a softer, deeper one. The purpose of being alive, fully, honestly, even imperfectly.